I fell from the stairwell of the 23rd floor. No, not a fall. I was pushed. Damian's palm pressed against my back, not hard, but just enough to make me lose my balance. I turned my head and saw his face, calm, indifferent, as if he were carrying out something he had planned for a long time. Natalie stood behind him, covering her mouth and taking a step back. She didn't scream. She didn't stop him. The fall lasted only a few seconds. The stairwell lights flashed past floor by floor, until a dull thud, my back slammed into the edge of the landing. Blood trickled down the steps, warm as it soaked through my clothes, then quickly turned cold. Damian's leather shoes appeared at the edge of my vision. He walked down, unhurried. Her dying now works out perfectly. Speed up the inheritance settlement, that piece of land can't wait. My consciousness began to blur. The last image I saw was the dusty incandescent lamp above my head. Then there was nothing. I thought that was the end. But I was wrong. I was jolted awake by a gust of cold wind. My eyes snapped open, and what came into view was not the ceiling of the stairwell, but a huge floor-to-ceiling mirror. Reflected in the mirror was a young woman, a white nightgown, loose flowing hair, pale pink lips, smooth corners of her eyes. A 23-year-old body. I looked down at my own hand. My ring finger was bare, with only a faint indentation left from years of wearing a ring. My gaze shifted to the room, a hotel suite, European-style decor, a pair of red candles flickering on the nightstand. A wedding dress hung on the rack, white satin, its hem embroidered with delicate pearls. The phone screen glowed. October 17, 2019, 11:47 p.m. The night before the wedding. 13 hours until I married Damian for the first time. 5 years until I died on the staircase. Memories converged and collided in my mind like two rivers. His smile when he lifted my veil at the wedding, his hand holding mine by the seaside on our honeymoon, Natalie's appearance in the 3rd year, the instant coldness on his face after my father's bankruptcy in the 5th year, and that hand pressed against my back. Neither warm nor cold, just like the man himself. I stood up and walked over to the dressing table. On WeChat, Damian had sent a message half an hour ago. Get some rest early. Don't be late tomorrow. My best friend Vivian had sent a string of excited voice messages. My mom, her voice choked with tears, said, "Serena, I'm so happy for you." I turned off my phone. In the drawer lay the wedding itinerary, with a line of small print on the back, "Hold your hand and grow old with you." I picked up a pen, crossed out that line, and wrote, 1,095 days. Enough. In my past life, from the moment he changed his heart to the moment he killed me, it took 3 years. This time, I also need 3 years. Footsteps came from outside the door. Leather shoes on the carpet, a slow rhythm, each step evenly spaced. The footsteps stopped at the door, paused for 2 seconds, and the doorknob turned. He walked in. Dark gray suit, light blue shirt, silver gray tie, Windsor knot. His hair was fixed with gel, revealing his forehead. His eyes were deep but cold, the kind of eyes that are always calculating, like a precision instrument. Still awake? The wedding is tomorrow. Get some rest early. Exactly the same as in my past life. In my past life, I would have blushed and said, "I can't sleep, I'm too excited." He would have hugged me and said, "Silly." This time, I said nothing, just looked at him. He furrowed his brow slightly, walked to the window, and lit a cigarette. "Serena. Are you sure you've thought it through?" He hadn't asked this question in his past life. I was taken aback and asked back, "Thought what through?" He turned around, the smoke blurring his expression. "About marrying me. You know what kind of person I am." In my past life, I didn't understand those words. Now I do. This wasn't a test of love, but a transaction. He was confirming whether I would accept his coldness, his selfishness, and the fact that he would never love me the way I loved him. "I know," I said. He stubbed out his cigarette, walked over, and stood before me, looking down. "Then, are you willing?" In my past life, I would have cried, thrown my arms around him, and said, "I do." This time, I simply lifted my head and looked into his eyes, those eyes I had gazed into countless sleepless nights, searching for a trace of emotion. There was nothing there. "I do," I said. No extra words. He furrowed his brow again, but didn't press further. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Don't mess up tomorrow." The door closed. I stood still, then returned to the dressing table and pulled open the bottom drawer. In my past life, I had hidden a letter here, written the night before the wedding. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I made a terrible choice. Not because Damian was bad, but because I was too weak." I stopped reading halfway through. Not out of sadness, but out of anger. In my past life, I knew on the night before the wedding that I was walking into a wrong marriage, yet I lacked the courage to leave. I chose to write a suicide note, hide it in the drawer, put on the wedding dress, smile, and walk into the ceremony, only to spend 5 years waiting for Damian to kill me with his own hands. I held the letter up to the flame of the red candle. The paper curled, blackened, and burned. The firelight illuminated my face and also the thinner, more exhausted shadow on the wall, Serena from my past life. "You don't have to die anymore," I said to the ashes. "I'll live for you." I opened the diary on the desk and wrote on the first page, October 18th, 2019. Wedding day. From today on, I will be his best wife. He will trust me, rely on me, and entrust everything to me. Then, one by one, I will take it all back. Wind rushed in through the window, making the candle flames sway violently. I closed the window, and the city's night fell silent. Only 2 red candles remained, burning quietly by the bedside. The wedding ended half an hour earlier than in my past life. This slight deviation made me even more certain rebirth is not a simple repetition. Every small choice can change everything. In my past life, during the toast, I changed into flat shoes because the high heels hurt my feet. My mother-in-law said I was not dignified enough, and I immediately teared up. This time, I stood in those painful high heels for 4 full hours. The back of my heels were rubbed raw, blood seeping into my stockings, but I didn't even frown. Mother-in-law Genevieve rarely nodded at me. "You did well today." "Thank you, Mother." I lowered my head slightly. Damian's arm wrapped around my waist, his fingers tightening briefly, not out of affection, but as a reminder, don't get too pleased. He never liked anyone earning his mother's approval, not even his own wife. On our wedding night, we returned to the Liu family villa. After Damian finished showering, he found a glass of 40-degree warm water on the nightstand. He took a sip, lay down, and within 3 minutes, his breathing had evened out. The sedative took effect. The mildest form of melatonin, colorless and odorless, harmless to the body, it would only make him drowsy when I needed him awake, and cloud his mind when he needed to focus. This was just the first step. In the first month of marriage, I turned myself into a textbook perfect wife. Every morning, I woke up at 6, put on makeup that looked natural, and made his favorite breakfast, toast toasted until lightly golden and soft, butter spread evenly, a runny fried egg, black coffee without sugar or milk, all served in his favorite deep blue mug. When he sat down to eat, he glanced at me. It was that same scrutinizing, calculating look, but this time, there was something in it I couldn't quite identify. "The eggs are fried well today. I'm glad you like them." Of course, he liked them. In the past life, I spent 5 years learning all his preferences, better than he knew himself. That knowledge didn't help me keep him then, because back then I only knew how to give blindly. In this life, every piece of information about him is a blade. In the 2nd month of our marriage, I began to infiltrate his social circle. In my past life, I was terrible at socializing and embarrassed him many times, so eventually he stopped taking me out altogether. This time, I came fully prepared. The first time I attended the company annual dinner with him, I wore a dark green velvet gown and the diamond necklace he gave me. As I took his arm and walked into the banquet hall, he turned his head slightly to glance at me. "You look. What is it?" I looked up at him, my eyes curving into a smile. "Nothing." The first person I met was his business partner, Victor. I knew his wife Amanda suffered from severe migraines, so I had found a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner skilled in treating this condition. Has Mrs. Amanda's migraine been any better lately? I mentioned casually. Victor paused, taken aback. How did you know? She rubbed her temple the last time we met, so I guessed. I happen to know a Chinese medicine doctor. Would you like me to share their contact information? The look in his eyes changed, not scrutiny, but a reassessment. Okay, thank you. With just that one sentence, in front of Damian's business partners, I went from Mrs. Serena to someone useful. At the annual meeting that day, I added 17 people on WeChat, one of whom was the marketing director of Damian's competitor company. Damian's expression flickered for a moment, but I still took the business card and said with a smile, "A pleasure to meet you." It was already past midnight by the time we got back to the car. Damian, having had a few drinks, leaned back in the rear seat and suddenly spoke up, "You're different today." I wasn't ready before, I said, turning to look at him as I reached out to brush the stray strands of hair from his forehead. "Now I'm Mrs. Damian, and I can't let you down." He stared at me for a few seconds, then suddenly took my hand. "Serena, have you been trying too hard lately?" My heart skipped a beat. He noticed. Damian's intuition was far sharper than I'd imagined, and perfection itself was a flaw. Trying too hard? I tilted my head, putting on a puzzled expression. "I just want to be good to you. Is that not allowed?" He was silent for a long time. The car drove into the tree-lined avenue of the Villa district, and the streetlights cast patchy shadows across his face. Finally, he let go of my hand. "Fine. Go ahead." I helped him into the bedroom and watched him fall asleep. Then I picked up my phone and sent a message to that marketing director, Mr. Marcus, regarding the project you mentioned. It seems my husband's company is also looking into it. If you're interested in discussing market trends, we could grab a coffee sometime. After sending it, I deleted the record, turned off my phone, and lay down. 3 days later, I met Mr. Marcus at a quiet cafe. 30 minutes of casual conversation. I casually dropped some inadvertent information enough to cost Damian that crucial project. But what I failed to notice was that there was another person sitting in the corner of the cafe. As the conversation drew to a close, a low, gentle voice came from beside me. "Mr. Marcus, and this is?" I looked up. A man stood by our table, wearing a deep gray overcoat and a light blue shirt, his cufflinks a subdued silver gray. His features weren't the sharp, striking kind like Damian's, but rather warm and pleasant to look at. Smooth brow, straight nose, lips slightly upturned in a comfortable curve. His gaze was very calm. Not scrutinizing, not appraising, but a pure, aimless kind of attention. Mr. Marcus quickly stood up. "Mr. Julian, this is Mrs. Serena, wife of Mr. Damian from Chi-Hing Group. Mrs. Serena, this is our company's general manager, Julian." Julian. I had heard that name in my past life, Damian's biggest rival, young, low-key, yet within 3 years he had swallowed up a third of Damian's market share. In my past life, I had only seen his photo in the news, never met him face to face. He extended his hand. "A pleasure." I shook it. His palm was dry and warm, with a firm but moderate grip, not like Damian's, which was forceful enough to assert dominance, nor like some others, weak and limp. It was just a normal, proper handshake. "Mrs. Serena is also interested in that project?" He sat down across from me, his tone as casual as if he were talking about the weather. I smiled. "Just making small talk." Small talk that lands on the core terms. He smiled too. Mrs. Serena is far too modest. A slight chill ran down my back. How much had he overheard? But he didn't press further. He picked up his coffee cup and suddenly said something that caught me off guard. "Has Mrs. Serena ever considered that some projects don't need to be understood through others?" Mr. Marcus let out an awkward cough. I looked into Julian's eyes. There was no mockery, no threat, not even a hint of testing in them. He was simply stating a fact. "What do you mean, Mr. Julian?" "What I mean is," he set down his coffee cup, stood up, and pulled a business card from his pocket, placing it in front of me. "If you want to know something, you can come directly to me. No need to go through a third party." He left. His name and phone number were printed on the business card, with a minimalist design, only dark gray font and a line of small text. Mr. Marcus wiped his sweat. Mr. Julian is not someone easy to fool. I didn't answer. I put the business card into my bag, placing it alongside the diamond necklace Damian had given me. That night, I wrote in my diary, Day 58. He's gotten used to my breakfast, my soup, my smile. Step 1 complete. P.S. Met Julian today. He's not simple. Closing the diary, a detail from my past life suddenly came to mind. After my death, the news headline read, Damian, former president of Chihung Group, arrested on suspicion of commercial crimes. And the one who filed the lawsuit was none other than Julian's company. So the person who arranged my funeral in my past life was him. I let out a bitter smile, turned off the light, and went to sleep. Moonlight streamed in through the window, spreading a layer of silver white across the carpet. In the 8th month of our marriage, Natalie appeared, 2 years earlier than in my past life. Damian started traveling frequently, coming home from 9 to 11, then from 11 to the early hours of the morning. He no longer drank the soup I made, saying he had already eaten out. He was still taking the calming medicine, but the dosage wasn't enough. His insomnia was getting worse, not because the medicine had lost its effect, but because of his guilty conscience. I knew everything, but I said nothing. I just continued being the perfect wife. Breakfast was made as usual, soup was cooked as usual, the wardrobe was organized as usual. When he came home late, I left a light on. When he didn't come back for dinner, I put the food in the fridge and threw it away the next day. This perfection itself was a knife, leaving his guilt with nowhere to hide. The turning point came on a rainy night. Damian came home at 2 in the morning, soaked through. I was reading in the living room. Hearing the door, I got up and fetched a dry towel. Why are you soaked? Where's your umbrella? He didn't answer. Standing at the entrance, rainwater dripped from his hair. The look in his eyes was no longer scrutiny or calculation, but an emotion I had never seen before, pain. What's wrong? I handed him a towel. He didn't take it. Instead, he suddenly grabbed my hand. Serena, have you ever lied to me? My heart raced, but my expression remained unchanged. No. He stared into my eyes for a long time. The sound of rain filtered in from outside. The villa was so quiet that the breathing of 2 people could be heard. Then he let go of my hand and walked into the bathroom. The sound of water started. His phone remained on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a message. Damian, it's raining so hard today. I'm so scared. Natalie. I read the message word by word, then flipped the phone over, screen facing down. The sound of water in the bathroom stopped. He came out in his pajamas, his hair still dripping, walked over to the coffee table, turned the phone over, and paused briefly. He had seen the message. I stood at the kitchen doorway. The soup is ready. He put his phone in his pocket, not drinking it, going to sleep. That night he didn't fall asleep. I heard him tossing and turning in bed, and it wasn't until 4 in the morning that he finally quieted down. I kept my eyes closed, breathing steadily, like someone fast asleep. But in truth, I was counting every time he turned over. 17 times. The next morning, he left without eating breakfast. For the next 2 weeks, I began the most critical step of my plan. Bit by bit, I fed all the information I remembered from my past life about Damian's business empire to his competitors. But this time, I didn't go through Mr. Marcus. I dialed the number on Julian's business card directly. The phone rang for a long time, and I was about to hang up when the other end picked up. Julian, his voice was low, with the sound of rustling paper in the background. Mr. Julian, this is Serena. 2 seconds of silence. Mrs. Serena, what's the matter? Yes. I want to discuss a deal with you. Another 2 seconds of silence passed. Then he gave an address and a time, 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, in his private office. The next day, I showed up at his office right on time. It was an unremarkable office building, with decor so simple it was almost cold. His office wasn't large, but it had a full wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunlight streamed in, falling across the dark hardwood floor, warm and inviting. He sat behind his desk, 2 cups of tea placed before him. "Have a seat," he said. I sat down. He didn't exchange pleasantries, didn't ask, "How have you been?" Just said directly, "Go ahead, what's the deal?" I liked that directness. "I can get you the core project of Chi-Hing Group within 3 months," I said. "The condition is that you follow my timeline." He picked up his teacup, blew on the steam. "Why?" "Because I needed Damian to lose everything at that exact moment." He looked at me. Those gentle eyes held no surprise, no judgment, not even sympathy. He simply looked at me, as if seeing someone he had known for a very long time. "Your marriage with him is in trouble." It wasn't a question. "You could say that." He set down his teacup. "I won't ask for the reason. But I need a justification to convince myself why I should get involved in a man's wife launching a commercial strike against him." I thought for a moment and said a single word, "Because he's killing me." His eyes shifted for an instant. Just an instant. Then he nodded. "All right. I'll help you." He didn't ask for more. He didn't even sign any agreement. He simply picked up his phone and sent me a message, his private number. "Contact me directly on this from now on." As I walked out of his office, the sunlight was beautiful. The October breeze carried the scent of osmanthus blossoms. Suddenly, I recalled a headline from my past life: "Julian sues Damian for commercial crimes." So it turned out that what he had done for me in my previous life, he was now doing 3 years earlier in this one, and this time, we were doing it together. Over the next 3 months, Julian worked like a meticulous clockmaker, dismantling Damian's business empire piece by piece based on the information I provided. Every move was legal, compliant, and flawless. Damian couldn't even find any evidence to accuse us of corporate espionage because all the information was obtained through publicly available market channels. During those 3 months, Julian and I met more and more frequently. It started with once a month, then once a week, and eventually we were on the phone almost every other day. He never asked me, "Why are you doing this?" He never asked, "Don't you feel pain?" He never tried to comfort me or offer advice. He simply brought me a cup of coffee at just the right temperature every time we met. No sugar, no milk, just the way I liked it. I had never told him how I preferred my coffee. "How did you know?" I asked once. "Last time at the cafe, you ordered an Americano," he said, as if stating something obvious. I was stunned. Damian and I had been married for so many years, yet he never knew I drank my coffee black, without sugar or milk. In my past life, I had always accommodated his taste, drinking the sweet, cloying lattes he liked, until I eventually convinced myself that I actually enjoyed that flavor. But Julian, who had only seen me once, remembered. I lowered my head and took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, but fragrant. "Thank you," I said. He didn't say anything, just gave a faint smile. It was so slight it was almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. Late one night, Damian burst into the kitchen, grabbed my wrist, and demanded to know if I had leaked the company's secrets. I calmly refuted him, using his infidelity as a shield. He let go and said, "I'm sorry." Those 3 words came too easily, and far too late. After Damian turned and left, I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling. Not out of fear, but because I suddenly realized something. I felt nothing for his pain anymore. No hatred. No love. Not even hatred. This was a state more terrifying than hatred. Because hatred at least means you still care. Not caring means he's already dead in my heart. I picked up my phone and instinctively opened Julian's chat. "You there?" 10 seconds later, he replied, "Yeah." Another 10 seconds passed. "Are you okay?" I stared at those 3 words and suddenly felt like crying. Not out of sadness, but because in these past 3 months, he was the only one who had asked me, "Are you okay?" Not out of politeness, not as a formality. He genuinely meant it. "Not really." I typed those 3 words, then deleted them. Typed them again, then deleted them. Over and over. In the end, I sent 2 words, "I'm fine." He replied with 1 word, "Okay." No follow-up questions, no unnecessary concern, just "okay." But I noticed he sent that message at 1:17 a.m. He works in finance and keeps a regular schedule, always asleep before 11. Yet he was awake now. He was waiting for me. I placed my phone on the nightstand, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight streamed in through the window, just as it had 3 months ago. But something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it. The day Natalie left Damian, the weather was beautiful. October sunlight streamed into the living room as I cooked soup in the kitchen. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Chi Group's stock price fell another 9.7% today, with a cumulative decline of over 40% over the past 3 consecutive weeks. I turned down the heat a little. Damian hadn't been home for 3 days. In my past life, it took him 5 years to build his business empire. In this life, it had been dismantled in less than a year. The doorbell rang. Natalie stood outside, an off-white trench coat, flawless makeup, but her eyes were swollen. I opened the door. "Mrs. Serena, can we talk?" She sat down on the sofa, and I poured her a glass of water. "Where's Damian?" "I don't know. He hasn't been back for 3 days." She paused for a moment. "He hasn't come to see me either." Aren't you angry?" I sat down across from her with my water glass and took a sip. "What are you angry about?" Her lips were trembling. In my past life, I thought she was a demon, the one who destroyed everything for me. But sitting here now, she was just a scared, uneasy, abandoned ordinary person. There was no fundamental difference between how Damian treated her and how he treated me. He needed different people at different stages, and once he was done, he threw them away. "He never planned to marry me." Her voice broke into sobs. "He told me to wait until he got divorced. Now he has nothing left, and he won't even answer my calls." She cried. I handed her a tissue. "Do you know what he told me before?" She looked up, her eyes red. "He said your marriage was arranged by the family, and he has no feelings for you." "Yeah, that's what he told me too." She was stunned. "As for his feelings for me, whether he has them or not, I don't know. But he comes home for dinner every night and has been drinking the soup I make for 8 whole months. Guess what's in that soup?" Natalie's face changed. "Nothing, just ordinary soup." I smiled. "He likes it a lot. He finishes it every time." I wasn't telling the truth. The sedatives had been stopped a month ago. They were no longer needed. His company had been hollowed out, his willpower had crumbled, and he was destroying himself. Natalie stood up, staggering slightly. "I'm sorry." She kept her head down and hurried away. I closed the door and finished the soup. My phone buzzed. Damian had sent a message. "I'm at the office. Come over." An hour and a half later, I arrived at Chi Group headquarters. The building was quiet, with moving boxes stacked in the hallways. Damian's office was on the top floor, and scattered documents covered the floor like a paper snowfall. He sat behind the desk, white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, collar wide open. 3 bottles of alcohol sat on the table, 2 of them already empty. "You're here. What do you want from me?" "A divorce." "Fine." He finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, with deep hollows beneath them, like a rusted blade. "Aren't you going to ask why?" "No need." I pulled a document from my bag and placed it in front of him, a divorce agreement. I had prepared it 3 months ago. His pupils contracted. "You had this prepared all along?" "I was waiting for you to speak." "Have you been scheming against me from the very beginning?" He stood up abruptly, the chair tipping over backward. I looked at him. His eyes were red. This man, who in my past life had pushed me down the stairs without so much as a blink, now stood amidst scattered documents, his eyes so red they looked ready to bleed. "Plot against you?" "I'm just protecting myself." "You lied to me." "What did I lie to you about?" My voice was soft. "I never cheated, never spent your money, never did anything to wrong you. You wanted a divorce, and I signed. What more do you want from me?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The mask of the perfect wife had been worn for nearly a year, without a single crack. Every smile was just right, every bowl of soup the perfect temperature. He had lost to someone who had never made a mistake. I took off the necklace from my neck and placed it on the divorce agreement. "I'm returning this to you." He stared at the necklace, then suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. Serena. Let go. He didn't. His lips were trembling, and a single tear slid from his left eye, falling onto the agreement, smudging the ink of the word Serena just slightly. Give me one more chance. His voice was shattered beyond recognition. I looked at that tear on his face. When the me from my past life called his name on the stairwell, he didn't turn back. When my blood ran dry, he didn't look. You're too naive. His eyes flew wide open. I pulled my wrist free and stepped back. Sign it, Damian. I turned around. Behind me came the crash of a chair toppling over and the shatter of glass. The elevator doors closed, and I leaned against the wall, my hands trembling. Not from fear, not from sorrow, but because I had finally said those words. The words I heard before dying in my past life, the words etched into my bones. You're too naive. This time, it was me who said it to him. The elevator reached the first floor, and the doors opened. The sunlight was beautiful, and the October breeze carried the scent of osmanthus flowers. A car was parked outside. Dark gray, a low-key model, and someone stood beside it. Julian. He was wearing a dark blue suit, no tie, holding a bouquet of white roses. The white petals still had droplets of water on them, as if freshly bought from a flower shop. He leaned against the car door, and when he saw me come out, he straightened up and smiled. That smile was faint, but I recognized it, exactly the same as the one from 3 months ago when we were having coffee in the office. Serena, I'm here to pick you up. I looked at the bouquet of white roses. Damian had given me white roses in my past life too, but those flowers were never really for me. They were for Mrs. Damian, part of social etiquette, decorations for the marriage. But the bouquet in Julian's hand had its thorns carefully trimmed, every bloom in perfect condition, not a single wilted petal. How did you know I was here? Just a guess. He opened the car door. It's a good day today. Perfect for a fresh start. I glanced back at the building behind me. Damian's office was on the top floor, the glass curtain wall reflecting the sunlight. I couldn't see who was inside, but I guessed he was standing there, looking down. I got into the car. Julian started the engine. The white roses were on the back seat, their fragrance faint, drifting over barely perceptibly. How did you know I got divorced today? I asked. He didn't answer. His hands gripped the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead, driving in silence for a stretch. Then he said something that left me stunned. Because I've been waiting for this day. Waiting for what? The day you no longer need to protect yourself. The carriage fell silent. Sunlight streamed in through the window, falling on my hands, on my now bare collarbone where the necklace had been removed. I said nothing. He said nothing more either. But that bouquet of white roses bloomed quietly in the back seat, its fragrance filling the entire carriage. My phone buzzed. It was the last message from Damian. You win. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, leaned back in my seat, and closed my eyes. In her past life, Serena died in a stairwell. In this life, Serena sat in a car heading toward an unknown destination, the sunlight warm and bright, beside a person who never asked questions but was always there. Julian. I opened my eyes and called his name. Yeah. Why are you helping me? He stared at the road ahead, silent for a few seconds. Then he said something I still remember to this day. Because when everyone else only saw you as Mrs. Damian, I saw you. I didn't press further. Because I knew he wouldn't say more. That's just how Julian was. He didn't need a reason to do things, or rather, his reasons were never spoken aloud. He was just there. Always there. The city was receding outside the window, sunlight streaking across the glass in shifting patterns. I turned my head to look outside, and the corner of my mouth lifted involuntarily. It's not a laugh. It's a very, very light feeling, like snow falling into the palm of my hand. I can't quite put it into words, but I know it's different from hatred. The days after the divorce were quieter than I had imagined. Damian vanished completely from my life. His company went bankrupt, his friends drifted away, and Natalie left. His name would occasionally appear in the news, but always in connection with liquidation and litigation. I'd see it, then scroll past. I don't hate him anymore. Truly, I don't. It was a strange feeling. I had hated him for so long, his name etched into my very bones, and then one day, that bone stopped aching. Not because it had been healed, but because that part of the past had finally become truly past, no longer bleeding, no longer inflamed, just a quiet scar. And Julian, during this quiet time, slowly walked into my life. He didn't confess his feelings. He didn't pursue me. There were no grand, dramatic gestures. He was just there. When I moved, he showed up. He didn't ask, "Do you need help?" He just started carrying boxes. When I was working late into the night organizing files, he sent me a message, "Get some sleep early." When I bought too many things at the supermarket and couldn't carry them, his car just happened to pass by. Every time, it was just right. Not a deliberate coincidence, not a carefully planned arrangement, but a presence that I had begun to grow accustomed to, a reassuring anchor. One day, while sorting through old belongings, I came across that red dress. I bought it myself after the divorce. I didn't tell him. I hung it deep in the closet, next to the white wedding gown I wore for my first wedding, satin, pearls, a 3-meter train, beautiful as a dream. I never touched that wedding gown again, but it always hung there, like a signpost. The first time Julian came to my place as a guest, he saw the red dress. "I've never seen you wear this one. I haven't decided when to wear it yet." He didn't press further. He walked to the doorway of the dressing room, glanced at the red dress, then at the white wedding gown beside it. He must have guessed something, but he said nothing. He only said, "Red suits you." I stood behind him, watching his silhouette in the doorway of the dressing room. Sunlight streamed in through the window, falling on his shoulders, coating them in a faint golden glow. At that moment, I suddenly thought, if one day I were to walk toward someone in this red dress, what would it be like? I pushed the thought aside. It was too soon. I needed time. And he, it seemed, was never in a hurry. One evening, we sat on the balcony of his apartment, drinking. The autumn wind was cool, and the city below us glowed like a sea of lights. He drank whiskey, I had red wine. We talked a lot about his childhood, his entrepreneurial journey, why he chose finance over taking over the family business. I listened, chiming in occasionally, but mostly just stayed quiet. His voice was low, steady, without inflection, like a quiet river. "So you've never thought about getting married?" He held his wine glass, thinking for a moment. "I've thought about it, but I haven't met the right person." "What kind of person would be considered the right one?" He looked into the distance, the city lights reflected in his eyes like shattered stars. "I wouldn't need her to change anything. She wouldn't need me to change anything either. We'd be together, just because. No reason needed." I looked down at the wine glass in my hand, the liquid refracting a dark red glow under the light. Sounds simple enough. It was always simple. He turned to look at me, those gentle eyes appearing deep in the night. "It's people who are complicated." I let out a small laugh. "Including me?" He looked at me for a long time. So long that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "You're the simplest person I've ever met." Simple? When you hate someone, you hate them completely. When you love someone, he paused. Though I haven't seen it yet, I imagine you'd love them completely too. My heart raced. Not out of fear, but because he saw me. He didn't judge me, didn't say I was too extreme or too cold. He simply saw me, and then accepted me. "Julian." I set down my glass. "Yeah. Are you chasing me?" He paused for a moment. Then he smiled, not that faint, barely perceptible kind of smile, but a real one, warm, with his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You caught me." I smiled too. And as I smiled, tears began to fall. Not from sadness, but because after all these years, no one has ever looked at me like that. No one has ever been there before I even said I do. My wedding to Julian is set for October 18th. Exactly 1 year ago, I married Damian. Choosing that date was no coincidence. I did it on purpose. The day Damian received the invitation, Vivian called to say he sat in his lawyer's office, tore the invitation to shreds, then picked up the pieces one by one and glued them back together. He sat there for a long time, staring at the crumpled card. He cried. I've never seen Damian cry before. I hung up the phone and went back to trying on the dress. No, not the wedding gown. It was that red dress. It was hanging in the deepest corner of my closet. The white wedding dress was still there beside it, but I never gave it another glance. The day of the wedding, the sunlight was beautiful. Julian chose the church. It wasn't big, it was old, but exceptionally clean. The stained glass windows depicted biblical stories, and the sunlight streamed through, casting colorful patches of light. No father walked me down the aisle. I walked alone. My mother sat in the front row, her eyes red-rimmed, but she held back her tears. The hem of the red dress swept across the floor with a soft rustle. I walked very slowly, each step landing squarely on the center of the red carpet, my spine held straight. In my past life, I walked toward Damian in a white wedding dress, thinking it was the beginning of happiness, only to find it was the entrance to hell. This time, I walked toward Julian in a red dress, not because I needed someone to save me, but because I wanted to walk the rest of the way with this person. At the end of the red carpet, Julian stood there. Black suit, white shirt, no tie. He reached out, took my hand in his, and interlaced our fingers. Serena, you look beautiful today. I couldn't help but smile. The organ music faded as the priest opened the scripture. Julian, do you take Serena to be your wife? To love her, honor her, and protect her in poverty and in wealth, in sickness and in health, until death do you part. Julian looked into my eyes. There was a warm, steady light in those eyes, just like the first time he handed me his business card. I do. The priest turned to me. I opened my mouth when suddenly a commotion arose from behind. The doors swung open. Silhouetted against the light stood a man, his suit wrinkled, hair a tangled mess, eyes sunken deep. Damian had lost a lot of weight, his cheekbones protruding, the collar of his shirt hanging loose. In his hand, he clutched a red velvet box. He walked in step by step, stopping in the middle of the red carpet. Serena, I've come to take you away. The church fell into silence. I looked at his face, the face I had once loved, hated, and seen in the moment of death. Damian, you should go back. I know I've done a lot of wrong things. His voice was so hoarse it was barely audible. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Serena, I loved you. I truly loved you. Someone behind me gasped. My mother stood up. My fingers were still clasped in Julian's hand, his thumb gently tracing circles on the back of my hand, just like the day he picked me up after the divorce. Did you ever love me? I did. The way you looked in your wedding dress that day, I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. Then why did you push me? The church was vast, and the echo carried her words far, far away. Damian froze. What are you talking about? When did I ever push you? I couldn't speak anymore. The stairwell from my past life, the hand that pushed me, those words, it's good that she's dead, all of that happened in a time and space that no longer exists. In this life, Damian never pushed me, never killed me. But it all really happened. In my bones, in my blood. It's nothing. You can go. He didn't leave. He walked to within 3 steps of me and snapped open the velvet box. Inside was a ring with a red gemstone, cut into a heart shape, refracting a light as intense as blood. I have nothing left. I only have you. Serena, I only have you. I looked at the ring. Red, heart-shaped, like a frozen drop of blood. I thought of the stairwell in my past life, of the blood that had flowed from my body. I reached out and took the ring from the box. Damian's eyes lit up for a moment. Then I placed the ring back in the box, closed the lid, and gently pushed it back toward him. Damian, do you know what the greatest distance between two people is? It's not life and death, it's that I've already reached the other shore, while you're still standing where you were, thinking I'll turn back. I pulled my hand out of Julian's palm, not letting go, but shifting into a different position, spreading my fingers, interlacing them, palm against palm. Then I turned to face the priest. I do. I've said these 3 words across 2 lifetimes. The first time was to Damian, when I thought it was a promise, the opening chapter of every beautiful story. Now I know it doesn't need to promise anyone anything, only to promise myself. I do want to live well. I do want to love someone worth loving. I do want to wear a red dress in the sunlight, and after walking through all the darkness, I still want to believe in the light. Julian lowered his head, his lips brushing against my ear, and whispered a single sentence. I know what you've been through. You don't have to tell me. From now on, I'll make every day better than the one before. I finally cried. Very light, very gentle tears, falling freely onto that red dress. Damian stood where he was, watching us exchange rings, watching us turn and walk side by side. He said nothing more, turned, and walked toward the door. Sunlight poured in from behind him, stretching his shadow long and thin across the red carpet, like a lonely question mark. The moment he stepped out of the church, the organ began to play again, bright, joyful, leaping like a spring. As I walked out of the church, I looked back. The empty church still held his footprints on the red carpet. The velvet box lay on the pew, its lid open, the red gemstone ring catching the light streaming through the stained glass windows. I didn't pick it up. Outside the church, the sunlight was bright. Julian opened the car door, and I bent to slide in. The hem of my red dress slipped into the car as the door closed. Where to? I don't know. Let's go somewhere that makes you happy first. The car merged onto the highway, the city shrinking smaller and smaller behind us. I rolled down the window, and the wind rushed in, tousling my hair and making the hem of my red dress flutter wildly inside the car. Julian reached out and took my hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of my hand. I turned to look at him. He was watching the road ahead. The sunlight gilded the side of his face in a layer of gold, and the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Julian. When did you start liking me? He thought for a moment. At the cafe. That time you ordered an Americano with no sugar and no milk. Wasn't that the first time we met? It's the first time. His voice was soft. But sometimes, liking someone doesn't take many times. I tightened my grip on his hand. The sunlight outside the window was beautiful. The October breeze carried the scent of osmanthus. In her past life, Serena died in a stairwell. In this life, Serena sat in a car heading toward the future, wearing a red dress, beside a person who never asked questions but was always there. This time, she didn't say I do in exchange for anything. She said it simply because she wanted to. That was all. A year later, I planted an osmanthus tree in the yard. Julian said osmanthus trees are hard to care for, and I said it didn't matter, if it died, I'd plant another. He helped me dig the hole, mound the soil, and water it, busying himself for the entire afternoon. Finally, standing beside the little sapling with mud all over his hands, he smiled and said, if it dares to die, I'll have words with it. What are you picking a fight with a tree for? He looked into my eyes. Because you planted it. The osmanthus tree survived. In autumn, it bloomed for the first time, not many flowers, just a few clusters, but the fragrance was strong. I stood under the tree, smelling it for a long time, until Julian wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Serena, are you happy? I thought about it. Happiness isn't a state, it's a moment. People can't be happy forever, just as flowers can't bloom forever. But I can say this, I'm no longer afraid. Not afraid of dawn, not afraid of dusk, not afraid of being alone, and not afraid of having someone by my side. Not afraid of loving someone, and not afraid of being loved. Happy, I said. Julian tightened his arms. The wind blew, and osmanthus flowers rustled down, landing on our hair, on our shoulders, and on the soil. In the distance, children were laughing, a dog was barking, and the aroma of home-cooked meals drifted from someone's kitchen. The warmth of mortal life, nothing more than this. In her past life, Serena never had the fortune to witness such a scene. But that's all right, in another time and space, somewhere beyond my reach, she must have finally been able to close her eyes, peacefully, calmly, and without any resentment, and fall asleep. I live for her. I am happy for her. For her, I loved the right person.